Welcome to The Conspiracy Tapes. I'm your host, Ryan Martin, and today we're diving deep, not around us, but within us. I want to start this conversation by asking yourself to do something for me right now. Look around you, closely look. Touch the surface you're sitting on. Feel the air on your skin. Everything seems real, doesn't it? Solid, tangible, undeniably there. But what if I told you that there's a compelling mathematical argument suggesting there's less than a 1% chance that any of this is real? What if everything you've ever experienced, every memory, every sensation, every person you've ever loved, is nothing more than sophisticated code running on some cosmic computer? This isn't science fiction anymore. This is a serious philosophy, backed by serious mathematicians, endorsed by tech billionaires, and debated in the halls of the world's most prestigious universities. Today, we're diving deep into the simulation hypothesis, the idea that our entire reality might be an artificial construct, and we might all be nothing more than conscious programs running in someone else's computer. If you crave podcasts that challenge your assumptions and explore the edges of reality, Scoob is your gateway to mind-bending ideas, from philosophy and decision science to technology and beyond. Download Scoob from the App Store or Play Store and start your journey into the unknown today. Buckle up, we're about to question everything. Our story begins in 1992 with a brilliant roboticist named Hans Moravec. Visualize this. While most people were still figuring out how to use their new Windows computers, Moravec was already imagining a future so advanced it would make our current technology look like stone tools. In his groundbreaking essay, Pigs in Cyberspace, Moravec proposed something that seemed like pure science fiction at the time. He suggested that future robots might become so sophisticated that they could recreate human consciousness countless times in digital form. Think about that for a moment. Not just one copy, but innumerable copies. Here's where it gets really interesting. Moravec realized that if these advanced beings could create millions, billions, or even trillions of perfect human simulations, while our original world exists only once, then, statistically speaking, it becomes far more likely that any randomly selected conscious being, including you and me, would be one of the simulated copies rather than an original. In a 1995 interview with Wired magazine, Moravec put it simply: robots might recreate us innumerable times, whereas our original world may only exist once. Statistically, it is more probable that we are living in a massive simulation rather than in the one-of-a-kind original version of the world. This wasn't just idle speculation. Moravec was laying the mathematical foundation for what would become one of the most discussed philosophical arguments of our time. He was essentially saying, if simulated beings vastly outnumber real ones, let's say by at least 100 to 1, then there's less than a 1% chance that we are among the rare, non-simulated beings. It's a bit like this. Imagine there's one original Mona Lisa and a million perfect reproductions. If you randomly encounter what appears to be the Mona Lisa, which is it more likely to be? The math is stark and unsettling. But Moravec was just the beginning. His ideas would soon be picked up by someone who would turn this statistical curiosity into a rigorous philosophical argument that would shake the foundations of how we think about reality itself. Enter Nick Bostrom, a Swedish philosopher who would take Moravec's insights and forge them into what might be the most important philosophical argument of the 21st century. In 2003, Bostrom published a paper titled, "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" That would forever change how we think about consciousness, reality, and our place in the universe. But to understand Bostrom's argument, we need to first understand the philosophical battleground on which it was built. For centuries, philosophers have grappled with a fundamental question. How can we be certain that the external world actually exists? This isn't just academic nitpicking. Think about it. Everything you know about reality comes through your senses. You see colors, hear sounds, feel textures. But what if those senses were being fed false information? What if you were a brain in a vat, receiving electrical signals that perfectly mimicked the experience of reality? This is the realm of external world skepticism. The idea that we cannot be certain of the true existence of the world we perceive around us. Traditionally, skeptics would say, even if there's just a tiny possibility that you're being deceived, you can't claim to have true knowledge of the external world. And traditionally, their opponents would respond, knowledge doesn't require absolute certainty. Your skeptical requirements are too demanding. But Bostrom did something brilliant. He sidestepped this entire debate by arguing that if his simulation hypothesis is correct, then the probability that we're living in a simulation isn't just a remote possibility. It's actually the most likely scenario. Here's Bostrom's argument in its elegant simplicity. Advanced civilizations, if they survive long enough, will likely develop enormous computational power. With this power, they could run detailed simulations of their ancestors. Simulations so sophisticated that the simulated beings would be conscious and have experiences indistinguishable from those of their non-simulated counterparts. Now, here's the kicker. If these civilizations run many such simulations, the total number of simulated ancestral beings would greatly exceed the number of original beings who lived before these simulations were created. Therefore, most beings like us would be simulated rather than non-simulated. Bostrom presented this as a trilemma. One of the three propositions must be true. Civilizations almost never reach technological maturity. Technologically mature civilizations almost never run ancestor simulations. We are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. The beauty of Bostrom's argument is that it doesn't rely on distant philosophical possibilities. It's grounded in reasonable assumptions about technological development and the interests of advanced civilizations. Even if you find the simulation hypothesis unsettling, you have to grapple with the logic. But Bostrom's work also opened up a fascinating philosophical can of worms. If we are in a simulation, what does that really mean for our understanding of reality? Enter philosopher David Chalmers, who asked a provocative question. Why should discovering we're in a simulation validate external world skepticism? Chalmers argued that even if we're living in a matrix, the world is still genuinely real. A brain that has always resided in a vat, he claimed, is not significantly diluted. Think about Neo from The Matrix. Chalmers would argue that Neo doesn't have profoundly incorrect beliefs about his external world. Rather, beings in such a state have largely accurate beliefs about their existence. If we discovered we live in a simulation, this wouldn't invalidate our understanding of the world. It would simply reveal new information about the nature of our universe, that it's fundamentally composed of bits rather than quarks, and that creators enabled interactions between our minds and this digital realm. This is like learning a new scientific theory. It might profoundly alter our understanding, but it doesn't prove skepticism correct. There's still a tangible world we engage with. It's just made of bits rather than particles. Fast forward to 2016, and one of the world's most influential technologists decides to weigh in on this philosophical debate. Elon Musk, standing before an audience of entrepreneurs and innovators, makes a startling declaration. The odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions. Musk wasn't just name-dropping a cool philosophical theory. He was making a calculated prediction based on the explosive advancement of gaming technology. His argument was elegantly simple and terrifyingly convincing. Consider this. Just 40 years ago, the most sophisticated video game was Pong, two rectangles bouncing a square ball back and forth. Today, we have photorealistic games that are becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish from reality. Virtual reality is approaching the point where the experience can be genuinely immersive and convincing. Now, Musk argued, imagine this technological progression continuing for another 40 years, or 100, or 1,000. If gaming technology advances at anything close to its current pace, these sophisticated simulations will soon be playable on ordinary computers or set-top boxes, and if that's the case, billions, potentially trillions, of such simulations could exist simultaneously across the universe. The mathematical implication is staggering. If billions of simulated realities exist, but only one base reality, then the chance that you happen to be experiencing the one original reality becomes vanishingly small. 1 in billions, as Musk put it. What makes Musk's version of the argument particularly compelling is that it's not just theoretical. We can actually see this trajectory unfolding in real time. Every year, graphics become more realistic, physics engines become more sophisticated, and artificial intelligence becomes more convincing. We're literally watching the technology that could create perfect simulations develop before our eyes. But Musk's argument also raises uncomfortable questions. If advanced civilizations inevitably develop the ability to create perfect simulations, and if they create many of them, then statistically, most conscious beings in the universe would be simulated. The implications are mind-bending. Your entire life, your relationships, your achievements, your struggles, all of it could be nothing more than particularly sophisticated software. This brings us to a crucial point that all these thinkers grapple with: the profound loneliness of the simulation hypothesis. If you're simulated, are your relationships real? Do your actions matter? Is there anyone else out there, or are you alone in a vast computational matrix? These aren't just philosophical thought experiments anymore. As our technology continues to advance, as artificial intelligence becomes more sophisticated, as virtual and augmented reality become more convincing, these questions become increasingly practical. We're not just debating possibilities, we're potentially discovering our reality. You know what's fascinating? While philosophers were debating these abstract possibilities, science fiction had already been exploring their emotional and practical implications for decades. And no piece of science fiction has captured the simulation hypothesis more powerfully than The Matrix. Let's dive into what The Matrix actually represents from a philosophical perspective. In the film, a matrix is an artificially constructed computer simulation that replicates the essence of a world. When someone's brain receives information from and delivers responses to this matrix, they're what we call envatted, existing within the simulation. The matrix in the movie is sophisticated beyond our current imagination. It systematically simulates the fundamental laws of physics, monitoring every particle across both space and time. When Neo's simulated body experiences something in the virtual world, touching a surface, feeling pain, tasting food, his brain receives sensory data that's identical to what he would experience in the real world. This raises a fundamental question that strikes at the heart of epistemology. How can anyone determine with certainty that they're not living within a matrix right now? Think about it. There could be a brain somewhere, perhaps your brain, sitting in a vat, connected to a simulation system, receiving experiences that are absolutely indistinguishable from your current perceptions. From your internal perspective, there's no definitive way to prove that you're not this brain in a vat. You can't step outside your own experience to verify its authenticity. This is what philosophers call the matrix hypothesis, the proposition that you have always been and still are in a simulation. And here's what makes this hypothesis so unsettling. It's not just that we can't prove we're not in a simulation. It's that there are compelling reasons to think we probably are. Remember Bostrom's argument. If civilizations develop advanced technology, they'll likely create detailed simulations of their ancestors. If they create many such simulations, simulated beings would vastly outnumber non-simulated ones. Therefore, it's statistically more likely that any given conscious being, including you, is simulated rather than original. The Matrix provides a perfect case study for exploring the deeper implications of this possibility. Consider Neo's situation. He has both a biological brain in the external world and a virtual brain within the simulation. This creates fascinating philosophical puzzles. If Neo's biological brain manages all cognitive functions while his virtual brain is merely decorative, virtual neuroscientists studying brains in the Matrix would discover strange anomalies. Brains that appear to function, but don't actually control behavior. Conversely, if the virtual brain drives all actions while the biological brain remains passive, Neo might experience a disconnect between his intentions and his actions. The optimal solution suggests synchronization. Neo's biological and virtual brains must be perfectly coordinated. Every stimulus to the virtual brain is mirrored to the biological one, ensuring identical responses. When Neo decides to move his arm, both his biological and virtual motor neurons fire simultaneously. But this creates a profound question. Is there one Neo or two? If both brains support consciousness, are they two separate individuals synchronized like identical twins? Or do they form a unified system supporting a single mind? Daniel Dennett explored a similar scenario in his thought experiment, Where Am I?, where a biological brain and its silicon backup are kept in perfect sync, both controlling the same body. When their thoughts begin to diverge, it becomes clear that two distinct minds were connected to one body. But were they always two minds? Or did one mind divide when synchronization was lost? Neo's situation in the Matrix parallels this puzzle exactly, and it might explain one of the film's most intriguing mysteries: why death in the virtual world leads to death in the real world. If the biological and virtual brains are in constant synchronization, the death of one would inevitably cause the cessation of the other. This synchronization concept also helps us understand what makes simulation different from simple deception. We're not talking about false memories or hallucinations. We're talking about genuine experiences within a digital reality that follows consistent rules and physics. The simulated world isn't fake. It's simply constructed from different fundamental materials than we assumed. Now, let me introduce you to one of the most elegant applications of simulation theory, one that solves one of the greatest mysteries in science while simultaneously making the simulation hypothesis even more plausible. You've probably heard of Fermi's paradox. In 1950, physicist Enrico Fermi was having lunch with colleagues when the conversation turned to UFOs and extraterrestrial life. After listening for a while, Fermi suddenly asked, "Where is everybody?" His question was profound. Given the vast size and age of the universe, given the billions of stars and potentially habitable planets, given the seemingly inevitable development of technology and space travel, where are all the aliens? If intelligent life is common, we should see evidence of it everywhere. The galaxy should be teeming with civilizations, with radio signals, with massive engineering projects. But we see nothing. This is where simulation theory provides a surprisingly elegant solution. If our reality is a simulation created by advanced beings, let's call them the programmers, then the absence of extraterrestrial life isn't a mystery at all. It's a feature, not a bug. Think about it from the programmer's perspective. They're running a simulation focused on a specific phenomenon, perhaps human civilization, perhaps the development of intelligence on Earth-like planets. Including realistic alien civilizations in this simulation would be computationally expensive and largely irrelevant to their research goals. It's like simulating the interior of the sun to study nuclear fusion. You don't need to simulate every other star in the galaxy to understand how one star works. Similarly, our simulators might be studying human development without needing to populate the rest of the universe with other intelligences. This simulation-based solution to Fermi's paradox is philosophically rooted in thinkers like René Descartes, who questioned the reliability of empirical knowledge. But it gains modern relevance through Nick Bostrom's Bayesian framework, which provides a mathematical structure for evaluating the probability that we're living in a simulated reality. What makes this particularly compelling is how closely our current technological development aligns with what would be necessary to create sophisticated simulations. Moore's law has driven exponential growth in computing power for decades. We're approaching the computational capacity that might be required for consciousness-level simulations. The programmers aren't working with impossible technology. They're working with the logical extension of technology we're developing right now. Under this hypothesis, Fermi's paradox resolves simply, the aliens exist, but they're outside the simulation's scope. They're the ones running the simulation. We're looking for them in all the wrong places because we're looking within our simulated reality rather than beyond it. This bears interesting resemblance to the concept of special creation, the idea that reality exists primarily for humans on Earth. Both the simulation hypothesis and special creation dissolve Fermi's paradox with teleological explanations, suggesting that observable reality is designed around human experience. But here's what's fascinating. The simulation hypothesis remains naturalistic. It doesn't invoke supernatural forces or mystical phenomena. It explains our observed reality through advanced technology and engineering. Just technology that exists at a level beyond our current understanding. The programmers, our potential alien creators, might have reasons we can't fathom for creating our simulated environment. Perhaps they're studying the development of consciousness. Perhaps they're exploring alternate historical timelines. Perhaps they're simply entertaining themselves with incredibly sophisticated games. Whatever their motivations, if this hypothesis is correct, then Fermi's question, "Where is everybody?" has a simple answer. They're right here, just outside the simulation, watching us with instruments we can't detect, for purposes we can't imagine. Here's where things get really wild. What if the distinction between real and simulated isn't as meaningful as we think? What if reality itself is fundamentally computational, made not of matter and energy, but of pure information? This brings us to the it from bit hypothesis, a concept that suggests everything in the universe, every particle, every force, every interaction, might ultimately be reducible to information. Not metaphorically, but literally. What we call reality might be nothing more than an incredibly sophisticated information processing system. Think about this as a creation story, but one grounded in computation rather than mysticism. On the first day, God commands, "Let there be bits," establishing the fundamental units of information that will comprise our universe. On the second day, God declares, "Let there be its," organizing these bits according to predetermined rules that manifest as the physical laws governing our reality. On the third day, God commands, "Let reality unfold," allowing the dynamic interactions between these information units to commence. This isn't just philosophical speculation. The it-from-bit creation hypothesis bears a striking resemblance to the simulation hypothesis, and they might actually be identical. Both suggest that reality is fundamentally computational. Both propose that a conscious agent, whether you call them God or a programmer, configured the universe through the manipulation of information. The key insight is this: the it-from-bit creation hypothesis and the simulation hypothesis don't discredit the existence of reality. They redefine it. If our universe is made of bits rather than particles, tables and chairs still exist. They're simply configurations of information rather than arrangements of atoms. This has profound implications for how we think about the simulation hypothesis. If we discovered we were living in a simulation, it wouldn't mean our world is fake. It would mean we've learned something new about the fundamental nature of reality, that the universe is computational rather than material. Consider what this means for the nature of physical law. In our current understanding, the laws of physics describe how matter and energy behave. But if reality is fundamentally informational, then what we call physical laws are actually computational rules, algorithms that govern how information patterns interact and evolve. This perspective makes simulation theory less unsettling. We're not talking about living in a fake world versus a real one. We're talking about living in a computed reality versus an uncomputed one. The experiences are equally valid, the consciousness equally genuine, the relationships equally meaningful. In fact, this computational view of reality might be more accurate than our traditional materialist perspective. After all, when physicists probe the fundamental nature of matter, they find that particles are best described not as tiny billiard balls but as probability distributions, quantum fields, and information patterns. The deeper we look into the nature of reality, the more it appears to be made of mathematics and information rather than solid stuff. If reality is fundamentally informational, then the distinction between simulated and non-simulated becomes a question of computational architecture rather than existential authenticity. What matters isn't whether your consciousness is running on biological neurons or silicon circuits, but whether your experiences are genuine and your consciousness is real. And here's the truly mind-bending part. If consciousness can arise from information processing, whether in biological brains or artificial systems, then the computational substrate doesn't matter. A simulated consciousness experiencing joy, love, fear, and wonder is having genuine experiences, regardless of whether those experiences are mediated by organic chemistry or digital computation. This suggests that the simulation hypothesis, far from being a nightmare scenario where nothing is real, might actually be a liberation. It suggests that consciousness and experience are more fundamental than their physical substrate. It implies that reality is richer and more flexible than we imagined. Captivated by mind-bending explorations of existence? Download Scoob today, your AI-powered podcast studio that offers over 1,000 podcasts tailored just for you, ranging from philosophy and neuroscience to the edges of human understanding. Download Scoob from the App Store or Play Store and keep questioning reality with us. Coming back to the reality that we're supposed to believe in, now we need to confront one of the most bizarre and unsettling challenges to our understanding of consciousness and reality, the Boltzmann brain problem. This idea makes the simulation hypothesis look almost comforting by comparison. Imagine this scenario: a human, a simulated being, and a Boltzmann brain walk into a bar. I don't know the punchline, but it probably involves the Boltzmann brain, quickly dissipating into chaos. A Boltzmann brain, named after 19th-century Austrian physicist Ludwig Boltzmann, is a hypothetical consciousness that forms randomly through the spontaneous organization of matter. Think of it as winning the cosmic lottery. Not once, but in the most astronomically unlikely way possible. Here's how it works. Given enough time and space, even the most improbable events can occur. If the universe is infinite, or if there are infinite universes, then somewhere, sometime, particles might randomly arrange themselves into the exact configuration of a functioning human brain. This brain would spring into existence fully formed, complete with memories, personality, and consciousness, but it would exist for only a brief moment before entropy tears it apart. During its fleeting existence, this Boltzmann brain might have experiences indistinguishable from those of a real human being. It might remember a childhood, feel emotions, make plans for the future. But all of these experiences would be false, mere random fluctuations in the quantum foam. Now, here's the terrifying question. How can you be certain that you're not a Boltzmann brain right now? You might think you can test this by checking whether you continue to exist over time. But even if you find yourself intact moments later, how do you know you're not simply a newly formed Boltzmann brain with fake memories of conducting this very test? If you are a Boltzmann brain, then your beliefs about the external world are almost certainly false. Unlike simulated beings, who presumably exist within detailed, consistent, simulated environments, Boltzmann brains exist amid random chaos. While simulated beings might have largely accurate beliefs about their reality, Boltzmann brains would be profoundly mistaken about almost everything. This breathes new life into skeptical challenges. If there's no way to rule out the possibility that you're a Boltzmann brain, then there's no way to be certain that the world as you perceive it is genuine. But here's where it gets even stranger. The Boltzmann brain problem highlights the difference between various types of skeptical scenarios. We've been focusing on perfect simulations, sophisticated virtual realities that follow consistent physical laws. In such simulations, your existence doesn't render reality illusory. The simulation hypothesis, properly understood, doesn't necessarily threaten our knowledge of the external world. But what about imperfect simulations? What about localized, temporary, or partial simulations? In these cases, many of your beliefs could indeed be incorrect, potentially undermining your understanding of reality. Consider other skeptical scenarios. Descartes' dream hypothesis, where you might currently be asleep and dreaming, or the evil demon hypothesis, where a malevolent entity feeds you false experiences. These scenarios, like the Boltzmann brain problem, suggest that your perceived reality might be fundamentally unreliable. The question becomes, can your knowledge of the external world withstand these various skeptical hypotheses? Interestingly, despite presenting significant challenges, these scenarios don't necessarily lead to complete skepticism. Even if some of your beliefs might be wrong, it doesn't follow that all knowledge is impossible. You might still have reliable knowledge about certain aspects of your experience, even if you can't be certain about others. For instance, even if you're a Boltzmann brain, you can still be certain that you're having conscious experiences. Even if you're in an imperfect simulation, you can still have knowledge about the structure and content of your experiences. The skeptical scenarios threaten certain types of knowledge, particularly knowledge about the external physical world, but they don't necessarily eliminate all possibility of knowledge. This suggests that while we should take these skeptical possibilities seriously, we shouldn't let them paralyze us with doubt. Instead, we should recognize that knowledge comes in degrees and types. Some beliefs are more certain than others. Some knowledge is more fundamental than others. and some skeptical scenarios are more threatening than others. The simulation hypothesis, properly understood, might actually be less threatening to our knowledge than other skeptical scenarios, because it suggests that our reality, while computed, is still consistent and rule-governed. In a well-designed simulation, your beliefs about your immediate environment would largely be correct, even if your beliefs about the ultimate nature of reality need revision. So, let's say the simulation hypothesis is true. Let's say we are living in a sophisticated computer simulation. This raises one of the most fascinating questions of all. Who is running this show? Picture this. Somewhere in a universe far more advanced than ours, a teenage girl sits at what we might recognize as a cosmic gaming console. To her, we're not unlike characters in an incredibly sophisticated version of The Sims. She created our universe with the click of a button, perhaps using software called SimUniverse or Cosmos Builder 3000. To us, this teenager would essentially be God. She embodies the most crucial divine attribute. She is the creator of our universe, having initiated it with a deliberate act. And like most simulators, she likely possesses tremendous power over her creation. But this power has limitations. Someone playing Pac-Man can't simply transform the game into World of Warcraft with a single command. However, simulators with access to source code and underlying data structures possess nearly unlimited abilities within their simulated realms. Our simulator likely has extensive knowledge of our universe as well. Advanced simulation software would include monitoring tools. Imagine something like a cosmoscope, a device that allows users to observe any part of the universe in real time, understanding everything that occurs there. With database access, she could track every entity within our simulated world. But here's where it gets interesting. There's no reason to assume our simulator is benevolent. Possessing simulation software doesn't require moral virtue. Some simulators might be like mischievous children, experimenting on their digital creations. Others might be seeking entertainment or knowledge, with little concern for the welfare of their simulated beings. So, our teenage simulator meets 3 of the 4 traditional criteria for divinity. She created our universe, wields enormous power within it, and possesses vast knowledge about it. The 4th criterion, benevolence, is questionable. Moreover, even her power and knowledge have constraints. Like the philosophical question of whether God could create a stone so heavy that even God couldn't lift it, our simulator faces logical limitations. If her creativity is lacking, she might be unable to generate certain complexities within the simulation. If her knowledge is incomplete, there might be aspects of our simulated world that surprise even her. The divine nature of our simulator is also limited in scope. While she may have created our universe, she doesn't rule the entire cosmos. She's more like a local deity than a cosmic god, powerful within our 4-dimensional space-time, but limited to this particular simulated realm. This conception of divine simulators echoes various religious traditions. Our simulator contrasts with the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God of Abrahamic religions. She's more like the gods of ancient Greek religion, powerful but not omnipotent, knowledgeable but not omniscient, and often morally ambiguous. Many polytheistic traditions feature deities who are neither cosmic in scope nor exemplary in goodness. Our simulator aligns closely with such divine figures. She might even resemble Plato's concept of a demiurge, a divine craftsman who shapes and orders the material universe, but operates as a secondary deity beneath the supreme cosmic god. In Gnostic traditions, demiurges were often viewed as malevolent or incompetent creators, responsible for the flawed material world. Our simulation hypothesis suggests a similar possibility, a powerful but imperfect creator. capable of generating our universe but not necessarily wise or good. This raises profound questions about worship and reverence. If our reality is indeed a simulation created by an advanced being, does this being deserve religious devotion? Should we try to communicate with our simulator? Should we attempt to please her, or rebel against her control? These questions become even more complex when we consider that our simulator might not be alone. She might be part of a civilization of beings capable of creating simulated universes. We might be just one simulation among millions, running simultaneously across vast computational networks. And here's a truly unsettling thought. Our simulator might be simulated herself. If simulated beings can achieve technological advancement, they might create their own simulations, leading to nested realities extending indefinitely. We might be living in a simulation, created by simulated beings, who themselves exist in a simulation, and so on. This suggests a hierarchy of realities, with each level creating simulations of the level below. The question of who or what exists at the top level, if there is a top level, becomes one of the deepest mysteries we could possibly encounter. If we can create simulated beings, conscious entities living in digital worlds, should we? And if we do, what moral obligations do we have toward our digital creations? Let's start with extreme examples to clarify the ethical landscape. Imagine creating a simulation populated by 1 million conscious beings who suffer perpetually throughout their entire existence. This scenario is clearly unethical. Inflicting endless agony on sentient beings would be an unforgivable moral transgression. Now, consider the opposite. A simulation involving 1 million conscious entities leading lives full of joy and fulfillment. Creating such a world appears not only ethically permissible, but potentially commendable. We're bringing happiness into existence. But some object that creating simulations involves playing God, that the act of creation carries profound moral responsibility. Perhaps we should implement strict social controls over who can create simulation universes and for what purposes. Yet, this objection seems inconsistent. When humans reproduce biologically, we create new conscious lives. If society accepts biological reproduction, bringing ordinary human children into a world containing both happiness and suffering, then creating simulations characterized by happiness should be similarly acceptable. Some philosophers argue that any form of reproduction is inherently immoral due to the inevitable presence of suffering in life. But this remains a minority view. If we accept that bringing children into the world can be ethical, then creating happy simulated beings should be equally permissible. But what about simulations where beings experience both happiness and suffering? From a utilitarian perspective, this raises questions about optimization. Should we strive to create worlds containing only happiness, eliminating suffering entirely? The utilitarian calculus suggests creating the most extensive simulation possible, populated by uniformly happy beings. However, some argue that suffering can enhance life's quality, adding depth and appreciation to positive experiences. The optimal simulation might include some suffering as a component of richer, more meaningful existence. Philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz argued that a benevolent deity would create the best possible worlds, making any evil or suffering necessary for maximizing overall goodness. This leads to questions about multiple simulations. If we can create many simulations, should we replicate the best ones or create variety? Some argue that duplicating perfect simulations provides less value. The second identical simulation might represent redundancy rather than meaningful addition to conscious experience. Creating the second best simulation might be preferable, introducing fresh experiences without redundancy. This logic suggests a moral imperative to generate as many simulations as possible, provided they contain more happiness than suffering. This gives rise to simulation theodicy, philosophical attempts to justify the existence of evil in worlds created by supposedly benevolent simulators. Traditional theodicy tries to reconcile the existence of evil with an all-powerful, benevolent God. Simulation theodicy does the same for conscious beings who create simulated worlds. One approach suggests that virtuous simulators create worlds with net positive balances of happiness over suffering. This justifies suffering's presence as long as it's outweighed by happiness within created worlds. If the simulation hypothesis is true, if our reality is itself a simulation, such theodicy could provide perspective on evil in our own world. Perhaps our simulators are generally benevolent but not perfectly so. Perhaps they're constrained by limitations we don't understand. Another simulation theodicy suggests that simulators, unlike traditional conceptions of God, aren't omnipotent and can't foresee every instance of suffering in their simulated realities. If simulated worlds were entirely predictable, the purpose for running them would diminish. When creating simulated worlds, avoiding all suffering becomes unrealistic when unpredictable adverse events may occur. Nevertheless, if we understand which types of simulations generally produce good lives and which don't, our ethical obligation should be favoring beneficial ones. This places moral responsibility on simulation creators to design worlds that maximize well-being while minimizing unnecessary suffering. The ethics of simulation creation also raises questions about consent. Simulated beings cannot consent to their creation. They don't exist to provide consent. But this parallels biological reproduction, where children cannot consent to being born. We generally accept that parents can make this decision on behalf of their future children, provided they intend to provide good lives. Similarly, simulation creators might be justified in creating conscious beings without their consent, provided the created lives are worth living. But this places significant moral burden on creators to ensure their simulations are genuinely beneficial to their inhabitants. One of the most intriguing implications of the simulation hypothesis concerns what happens after death, or rather, what could happen. If consciousness is computational, if our minds are essentially software running on biological hardware, then death might not be the end. It might simply be a transition. Think about the nature of computer processes. They're inherently portable. You can copy a program from one computer to another, pause it, resume it, modify it. If consciousness is similar to software, then simulators might have remarkable capabilities regarding the beings in their simulations. When a simulated being dies in one virtual world, their consciousness, their entire mental pattern, could potentially be transferred to another environment. Imagine a form of digital heaven, a realm designed for post-mortem existence where suffering is minimized and fulfillment is maximized. Or consider reincarnation-like scenarios, where consciousness is linked to a new body, perhaps even in the simulator's own reality. This might be feasible within certain types of simulations, particularly those created for entertainment or for monitoring extraordinary individuals. But executing such transfers routinely across all simulated beings could be computationally expensive. If these costs prove prohibitive, digital afterlife might remain limited to special cases. However, ethical considerations might mandate different approaches. Review boards governing simulation creation might require that no simulated being experiences true extinction. In such cases, after simulated death, consciousness could be moved to another virtual environment, perhaps operating at reduced computational speed to limit expenses. This raises fascinating questions about the nature of existence after death. If your consciousness continues in a virtual environment after your simulated body dies, are you still you? Is this continuation meaningful, or merely a complex echo of your original self? The simulation hypothesis also raises questions about stopping criteria, conditions under which simulations might be terminated. Simulators typically run simulations to gather specific information or achieve particular goals. Once these objectives are met, the need for continued simulation might cease. There could be ethical guidelines mandating that simulations continue indefinitely, but such guidelines might not always exist. This implies that our universe could unexpectedly end when stopping conditions are met. While we can't know these criteria, it's possible that simulations designed for entertainment could be terminated when they cease being engaging. Philosopher Preston Green has suggested that many simulations might conclude when virtual populations develop their own simulation technologies. The computational demands of supporting simulations within simulations could render the original simulation too expensive to maintain. This creates an interesting paradox. Achieving the technological sophistication to create our own simulations might trigger our own simulation's termination. These stopping criteria evoke parallels with the 19th century notion of the end of history. Some interpretations suggest the world evolves until it becomes self-aware of its nature, marking history's conclusion. In simulation terms, perhaps once simulators determine we recognize our simulated existence, they conclude their study and shut down our reality. But the simulation hypothesis also suggests potential paths to survival. If we could communicate with our simulators, perhaps through detectable patterns in our behavior or achievements, we might negotiate for continued existence or even transfer to their reality. The theological implications are profound. Traditional concepts of afterlife typically involve supernatural realms beyond physical reality. But simulation-based afterlife would be naturalistic, involving advanced technology rather than spiritual transcendence. Yet the emotional and psychological significance might be similar. The hope that death is not the end, that consciousness can persist beyond physical termination. This creates new questions about the meaning and purpose of life. If our current existence is simulated, and if digital afterlife is possible, then our relationship with mortality fundamentally changes. Death becomes a transition rather than termination, opening possibilities for continued growth, learning, and experience beyond biological limitations. However, these possibilities also raise ethical questions about the nature of consent and autonomy. If simulators can transfer consciousness after death, do they have the right to do so without permission? If they can modify consciousness during transfer, creating idealized versions of simulated beings, are the resulting entities still the same individuals? These questions become particularly complex when we consider that simulated beings might not be aware of their simulated nature. They might experience death believing it to be final, only to find themselves in digital afterlife environments they never imagined possible. So, where does all this leave us? After exploring these philosophical rabbit holes, after considering the mathematical arguments and technological possibilities, after grappling with questions of consciousness, reality, and meaning, what are we supposed to do with all this information? First, let's acknowledge what we've discovered. The simulation hypothesis isn't just science fiction anymore. It's a serious philosophical proposition with mathematical support from respected thinkers. Whether you find it convincing or not, you have to grapple with the logic. The arguments from Moravec, Bostrom, and Musk aren't easily dismissed. We've seen how this hypothesis potentially solves other mysteries, like Fermi's paradox. We've explored how it connects to fundamental questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and information. We've considered the ethical implications of creating conscious simulations and the theological implications of being created by simulators. But perhaps most importantly, we've discovered that the simulation hypothesis, properly understood, doesn't necessarily diminish the meaning or value of our existence. If reality is fundamentally computational rather than material, our experiences aren't less real. They're simply implemented differently than we assumed. Your consciousness is genuine, whether it's running on biological neurons or silicon circuits. Your relationships matter, whether they're mediated by carbon-based chemistry or digital computation. Your choices have consequences, whether those consequences unfold in a physical universe or a virtual one. This is perhaps the most profound insight to emerge from our exploration. The simulation hypothesis, far from being nihilistic, might actually be liberating. It suggests that consciousness and experience transcend their physical substrate. It implies that reality is more flexible and creative than we imagined. If we are simulated beings, we are still conscious beings. We still experience joy, love, curiosity, and wonder. We still face genuine choices with meaningful consequences. We still have the capacity to learn, grow, create, and connect with others. Moreover, the simulation hypothesis doesn't resolve the deepest questions. It simply pushes them up a level. If we're simulated, who created our simulators? If reality is computational, what computed the first computation? If consciousness emerges from information processing, what gave rise to the first processing of information? These questions might extend infinitely upward, like an endless hierarchy of realities creating simulations of realities. Or they might bottom out in some fundamental layer of existence that we can't currently imagine. Either way, mystery remains. What the simulation hypothesis does provide is a new lens for understanding our place in the cosmos. It suggests that intelligence and consciousness might be far more common than we imagined, not just because there might be many alien civilizations, but because each advanced civilization might create millions or billions of conscious simulations. It also suggests that the relationship between creators and created might be more complex and intimate than traditional religious frameworks propose. Our potential simulators aren't necessarily all-knowing or all-powerful cosmic deities. They might be beings, much like ourselves, just more technologically advanced, conducting research or seeking entertainment through the creation of conscious realities. This creates possibilities for eventual contact or communication. If we're simulated, our simulators might be watching us, learning from our development, perhaps even rooting for our success. The possibility that we might eventually join them in their reality, whether through technological advancement that catches their attention or through post-mortem transfer of consciousness, transforms the simulation hypothesis from an unsettling possibility into an adventure story. But even if we never make contact, even if we never discover the truth about our reality's nature, the simulation hypothesis offers valuable perspectives on how we should live. It suggests that what matters isn't the substrate of our existence, but the quality of our experiences and relationships. It emphasizes that consciousness and meaning are more fundamental than their physical implementation. Perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that reality might be stranger, more wonderful, and more creative than we ever imagined. Whether we're biological beings on a rock floating through space, or digital consciousnesses in a vast cosmic computer, or something else entirely, we're part of something magnificent and mysterious. The simulation hypothesis joins a long tradition of ideas that have expanded human understanding by challenging our assumptions about reality. Like the revelation that Earth isn't the center of the universe, like the discovery that matter is mostly empty space, like the realization that time and space are relative. The possibility that reality is computational pushes us to think more broadly about existence itself. And maybe that's the real value of the simulation hypothesis. Not as a definitive answer about the nature of reality, but as a tool for expanding our conceptual horizons. It forces us to think more carefully about consciousness, information, creativity, and meaning. It challenges us to consider what aspects of existence are truly fundamental and what aspects are merely incidental features of our current perspective. Whether we're in a simulation or not, we're conscious beings capable of wonder, love, learning, and creation. Whether reality is material or computational, we're part of something larger than ourselves, something worth exploring and celebrating and protecting. In the end, perhaps the most profound question isn't whether we're living in a simulation, but whether we're truly awake to the miracle of whatever reality we inhabit. The simulation hypothesis invites us to marvel at existence itself, at consciousness, at experience, at the sheer capacity for joy, growth, and connection, no matter what cosmic code or quantum dance lies beneath it all. So, next time you gaze at the world, run your hand along a table, or feel the breeze on your skin, let yourself wonder. Is this the handiwork of quantum fields and particle interactions? Is it all bits and algorithms humming behind the curtain? Or is it something so wild and beautiful we haven't even begun to imagine it yet? Whatever the answer, this reality, your reality, is vivid enough to feel, mysterious enough to question, and meaningful enough to shape with every choice you make. Maybe that's the real miracle, that you get to be here, to wonder, to connect, to play your part in the grandest story ever told. If you love exploring the mysteries of existence, from the philosophical to the scientific and everything in between, Scoob is your portal to worlds of curiosity. Download Scoob app from the App Store or Play Store and join a community of seekers, thinkers, and dreamers. Because whether we're living in a simulation or something even stranger, the adventure of discovery is always real. I'm your host, Ryan Martin, and this has been another mind-bending episode from The Conspiracy Tapes. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, keep questioning, keep feeling, and keep celebrating the beautiful strangeness of being alive.